All right. Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Haley Munson. I am with Elsinore Valley Municipal Water District. I really appreciate all of you taking your time to join us this morning. This workshop is our Prepare Your Landscape for Spring. I'm going ahead and we'll pass it off to Isabel Hernandez. She is with the Inland Empire Waterkeeper. She has been doing workshops with us for the last 2 years now, so she's very familiar. She's very well educated in landscape, irrigation. She's from the Inland Empire, so she really knows our area specifically well. So she really is the expert. So definitely, if you have any questions, take advantage, put those in the chat box, and we would really love to get some dialogue going. So without further ado, Isabel, I'm going to go ahead and pass over the screen to you, and you can go ahead and get started.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you, Haley, for having me, and thank you all for also joining. I'm going to go ahead and start my share. Let's see if we can get that going here. Let's see. Okay. Haley, how's that screen looking on your end?
Looks good.
Awesome. Okay, everyone. Well, today's presentation is going to be on preparing your landscape for spring, and it is being presented by Inland Empire Waterkeeper. And like Haley said, my name is Isabel Hernandez, and I will be your speaker for today. Today, the first thing we're going to be talking about is garden tool maintenance. One of the things that we definitely all address is the handling of our tools. And every garden tool is unique to the garden as it is to the gardener. And reason being, of course, is that there is no one garden alike. And people's needs and interest in tools definitely vary. But the one thing we want to make sure you walk away with is understanding that you should follow the manufacturer's guideline to keep up with your tool maintenance. A lot of times we do neglect them, and that's one of the things we want to make sure you stay on top of, is always storing your tools properly. Keeping them clean is very important, and we're going to discuss that in a little more detail. And so is obviously keeping your sharp, and this will avoid other situations, fraying or shredding cuts that may be obviously hindering your plants and potentially exposing them to situations that we'll further discuss regarding your tools and the sharpness, things like that. So one other thing that we also want to address, of course, for those tools that have handles, is to prevent cracks. Obviously, most cracks will happen with wood tools. Some occasionally do happen with plastic or metal, but we want to make sure that you do address that properly. One thing that I do recommend as a tip is boiled linseed oil. Although it is best used for metal parts, wood handles also benefit from having that linseed oil applied to it as a wood protector. A crack pre-existing, I definitely recommend grip tape that you may find at your sporting goods store, usually used for equipment such as bats and things of handles, sporting equipment of handles. But nevertheless, please protect your handles to just perpetuate that life of your garden tools. And of course, as you start with your garden, one of the things that we definitely want to make sure you are staying on top of is discarding broken tools. Many people think that they might be able to repair them, or it shouldn't be a big deal to work with a tool that might have a missing screw or potentially, have a little crack. Those little cracks at times have caused a lot of gardeners emergency room visits, and we definitely want to make sure that that is not the case for any one of you. Of course, these are not the times to be obviously attending an emergency room or an urgent care situation, because the obvious situation being that it could have been avoided had the tool, the broken tool or the tool with disrepair hadn't been used. We're going to go ahead and talk about now the gardening tool cleaning. I mentioned earlier that I was going to share a little more information about that. And one of the reasons I'm very adamant about it is because I have personally, obviously neglected myself from cleaning some of my garden tools. And most of the time it didn't seem to have an impact at all with my garden until some of my cutting tools actually caused my trees to die off. And I'm going to share the reason for it. See, cleaning the tools after is something that you should be doing consistently. And neglecting this chore obviously may host parasites and diseases that can transfer to the next plant. The metal that is used obviously in the cutting tool may contain those parasites or even the disease that was maybe pre-existing in a plant that you might have trimmed or taken out. And of course, not having cleaned those tools, using them again on another healthy plant, now that cut is exposing that disease to the other plant. So unfortunately, my lesson was that I started noticing a tree looking a little bit diseased. It seemed like something was wrong. But I thought maybe if I just trimmed it and up with it, it wouldn't be a big deal. I didn't think it would be a problem. Actually, I didn't even think at all that having the dirty tool would cause me the problem when I went to the next tree. The disease that I thought I was getting rid of right in on. So please make sure that. Now, for those of you that don't share with you, sanitizing your tools is really simple. It's very easy. And I found that when it's usually very good to work with pruning tools, grafting tools, saws, axe, anything that makes a cut. But of course, not just that specifically. You can do this with all of your garden tools just to do the maintenance and the upkeep of them. Is basically using a great tool for sanitizing is the isopropyl rubbing alcohol at 70%. Now, this obviously evaporates very quickly, and it also works great on a spray bottle. Now, here I'm going to show you an example of how I went ahead and took just a regular isopropyl bottle, and I went ahead and screwed on a spray bottle on it. Apparently, that is something that you can do, and I love doing that because I can carry the bottle as part of my garden tools. And as I'm using the tool itself, I do carry it with a rag and I spray it to cut or address. Now, many of you might have heard that bleach or other household products can be used, but I want to share with you a warning. First of all, bleach does need to be diluted. And the ratio to using bleach is going to be 1 to 9. In other words, 1 part bleach and 9 parts water. But the warning to it is that it does damage metals, rubber, plastic, as well as clothing and other surfaces. So rather than dealing with the potential damage that you'll cause over the long haul use of bleach, I definitely recommend the isopropyl rubbing alcohol because it does evaporate quickly and it does not cause rusting on your tools, on your metals, or any other situation such as bleach does. Okay, now for those of you that are obviously here, the getting started, the planning of your garden is probably a very overwhelming that are in a lot of negligence, of course, and that's usually not the problem. The problem is obviously letting it be that way for the long haul. But one of the things that I did obtain as a landscaper assistant was that I also realized that there is no one cookie cutter checkoff list for starting your garden. The one thing I did pick up on was that, of course, as a landscaper, most landscapers that are hired, and you don't have to hire them, you can actually use this list as a checkoff for yourself, is that people come in as a landscaper and they make observations of your garden. The one thing that they're looking for, of course, is making sure that they can make a quick impact to having come into your garden. And therefore, clearing the clutter is going to be a #1 priority. Now, the garden and non-garden items that are in your garden obviously need to be removed out of your working way. So therefore, toys and furniture and just discarded things that just seem to have no use in there in those areas should immediately be removed. As you can see in the illustration or the picture below, this is a small garden area that you can see. There seems to be pool equipment and some gardening buckets, a couple of tools, a lot of rock, and just random items. Well, that might be a catch-all situation, but this homeowner decided to make a very sitting area for their home and decided this was never going to stay the same. So the first thing that we did coming in was, of course, separating all the material that was reusable and putting it aside. We took out all the material that was going to have to get put out in the trash or taken to the dump, and we had a clean palette to work with. Even though there was plenty of stuff that still needed to be removed or switched around, that was one of the ways we attacked it. Now, the second thing that someone coming in to do this area of landscape is going to identify is sections. Remember I said a landscaper wants to come in and have an immediate impact of their work so that they can show you the progress that they've done. Well, this is what we do. We identify sections and areas such as planters, raised planters, potted plants, tree shrubs, vines, lawn areas, kid play areas, and walkways. As soon as you start identifying, you break everything down, and that also makes the task a little lighter because now you know you have several multiple tasks, all small, and they can be a little better managed. Now, along with making those sections, you do make a task list for each area. For example, weeding, pruning, planting material, mulching, and repairs. That list of tasks may potentially be on every section, but as you work, you can definitely check them off and make an immediate impact on your gardening day. So those are our recommendations for you to consider when you do get started. Like I said, having been approached for many years by people asking, how do I tackle my backyard when their backyards may look like several of these pictures? And it is one at a time. Clearing the that has no relevance of materials that shouldn't be there, and of course, making sure you remove them for your safety or for others, and then identifying the area and then making a task list per area is the best way to address those overwhelming garden areas in your backyard. Now, talking about addressing something, here we are with weeding tools and choices. As you can see, I've identified several tools that are normally used for weeding. And one of the things that I most recently tried out was a weeding torch tool, which is on your illustration #1. Now, I had to try it because, of course, it was very promising and it sounded like a great idea. But the realistic truth is that it only burned the top layer of those weeds. And unfortunately, I was able to determine that the weed seeds may have still have been viable because there was a return of weeds. And also the roots below that did not get torched also had a vigorous moisture come back to it. So on my end, my recommendation is to not spend the money on something like this. It does seem to be promising as it is advertised, but having spent the money myself and having tried it out, I did not find this to be a very promising tool. #2 is another one of those tools that is something you add to your hand battery operated drill. And of course, this is promising because it seems like you quickly can address the roots on your weeds out there and pull them out quickly. The unfortunate part is that the spinning also just spreads the seeds that are potentially on all those weeds. So unless you know that your weeds at the moment do not have seeds, this is not a tool I would recommend. And obviously the weed whacker, we all know it. It's one that gardeners use. We probably all have one, but keep in mind that when you are removing weeds that are 2 feet or higher, you may potentially also be spreading the seed of all those weeds that you're chopping without removing the roots. And of course, that is only going to perpetuate the labor for the future. Definitely not the tool of choice for weeding. Another hand tool similar to number 2, of course, not powered and may potentially be one that you can use as well. I don't really have an opinion or a favor of it because, of course, this one being manual, you don't necessarily have the spin that you do with number 2, but you may potentially find yourself having to bury in the seed as you're pushing your weight to get to the roots. Number 5 is the hula hoe, and that's the one that I've used very often because I do stay on top of my weeds. I don't let them go to seed. So the first thing I go after is the hula hoe, and that's because it brings the soil. You are basically lifting a little bit of that top soil and wipe them out. So that's a keeper for me. And for those of you that do happen to have the weeds already showing seeds or flowers, you might want to reconsider, or you might want to work around those particular weeds. Just because, like I said, the last thing you want is to put in such great effort and then spread more seed around. Hand tools, I love them. This is the best way to get to the weeds. You really have an opportunity to handle them carefully to ensure that they do not that you're not spreading the seeds on those weeds. And just like I mentioned earlier, I always section off areas of working. And it's one of the best ways to stay on top of the weeds themselves, because once you have done a cleanup, you will potentially have a lot of weeds germinate again. And you really want that. You really do, because you will have better control on the 3rd round of making sure that you have a weed-free landscape. Okay, now there's so many weeds that we can talk about, but these 3 are the most noxious weeds out there, especially in the Inland Empire and in the Lake Elsinore area. Now, the bulb oxalis is a winter grower, which about this time may have beautiful yellow or pink or varied color leaves. But nevertheless, this little guy does spread quickly because the seeds, all they need is just a little touch and they will immediately, the seed pops will immediately pop, and they are about the size of a pin. They are tiny, tiny, and they'll spread about 5 feet apart, and that will just perpetuate them. They also have, they also on the bottom have a root that will also provide the ability for them to perpetuate below. Just like the nutsedge. The nutsedge also has a nut on the root bottom and also seeds up on top. And those are the reasons that these 2 are definitely on that list of having to get rid of them. I'm going to talk to you about how to actually do it because I've had to. The 3rd one, of course, is Bermuda grass. Many people really do use Bermuda grass as a lawn because it is very hardy, especially in our climate during the summer months. Triple-digit weather is not a problem for Bermuda grass. Watered or not, it will survive. And one of the reasons that it does is because, of course, it has a top seed, it has a rhizome, and a stolon, and those will perpetuate and spread quickly. The unfortunate part of having them as a lawn is that they do not recognize boundaries and will go through many lengths to ensure they seek out areas that are more moist than others, of course, and will choke out many plants before you really take a benefit of this Bermuda grass as a lawn. Now, I mentioned that I had past, and one of the things that I have done with the bulb oxalis is that as soon as I have seen pods, the seed pods on those weeds, I grab a paper towel, I wet it with a spray bottle, and I lay it over the top. The reason I do that is because the minute that you touch that weed or anything touches that weed, the vibration will just send off those seed pods to open immediately and pop all over the place. So that's one way I catch those seeds, because as soon as I take out that weed with root and all, and I look at that wet, moist paper towel, I find hundreds of those seeds just stuck on that paper towel. So that's one way of addressing that one. The nutsedge, of course, is an indestructible weed. There is nothing that can kill it, and it will perpetuate. The roots on this are really thin, and of course that makes it very hard when you lift it and try to remove the roots, that you'll get all the nuts. So with both the bulb oxalis and the nutsedge, the best thing is to actually dig out with a shovel the entire plant and discard it, not in the recycling bin, but in the trash. And that is one way that you will definitely get rid of it. Of course, it will leave a divot of missing soil, but over the long haul, this is the best way to discard these Bermuda grass. That's a little difficult because, of course, these roots can go very deep. I've seen it go as low as maybe 2.5, almost 3 feet. But the good thing about it is that when you start discarding the roots and and you ensure that you look out for every time you see something coming in, you definitely have to take into consideration also the removal of the soil at times. And sometimes it's the best way to do it. Now, of course, I'm not going to tell you that any of these weeds do well with chemicals. I can guarantee you that the nutsedge will not do well with chemicals whatsoever. But because we do care about our environment, and I understand that there are many chemicals out there that can probably address these weeds. Please keep in mind that these chemicals, once they are in your environment, they will be there forever, and they do affect, with runoff, our ecosystem, and eventually end up in our waterways. So those are things that we are very concerned about. And of course, there are other means, just like I've shared, to ensure that weeds are better addressed. Identify. We obviously already shared about weeds. The next one is identifying the 3 Ds. Now, the 3 Ds are dead, disease, and damaged plant material. You immediately go after it because there is no need for you to try to salvage it or try to revive it, because many of the times with a dead plant, of course, there's no purpose of it. It's already gone. But I do want you to put your detective hat on, because there has to be a reason why this plant died. Was it because it did not have enough moisture? And just like this picture here, I can tell you that was not the problem, because there's obviously a plant nearby that is perfectly healthy and did not suffer the same consequence. So there had to be another reason for this plant to have died. Many times you can still identify some things such as ants that usually, and they're very good at transplanting bugs actually into other plants. And that's one of the reasons sometimes we do lose them, because these ants know that if they bring these aphids or scale or other pests to the plant, that eventually they'll get what they want and the plant may potentially die, as you can see in the illustration. Another one, of course, is disease. If there is a diseased plant, and this happens to be an aloe, and this is a picture of alomite, you really do need to discard it, and it does not go into your recycling bin. In any of the cases, whether it's dead, disease, or damage, it is best to not put it in the recycling bin. It is most ideal to put it in the trash. Of course, you see damage, and you do need to assess what may have caused the damage. Was it pest? Was it disease? And you obviously need to remove any plant material if potentially there is that ability to salvage it from, having anything that may be damaged without disease could be salvageable. But don't forget to use that spray bottle in every one of these situations with that isopropyl alcohol if you're going to use any of your garden tools. Okay, now we're going to talk about pruning, but we're only going to address basics. The 6 reasons why we prune are for health reasons. We talked about the 3 Ds, and those are definitely good reasons to remove or to prune. Of course, we need to address control of the size of the plant, either to reduce it or to decrease shade or prevent interference with utility lines or other situations. And also to prevent injury to oneself or to property, such as having low limbs or removing thorny branches that may be in a pathway. Another reason to train or prune is to train your plants to shape topiaries or bonsais or espalier or other plant training that you may be doing to it are good reasons to do your pruning. And of course, to promote fruiting and flowering. Now, proper pruning for flowering buds encourages early vegetative growth, and thinning it also produces larger fruit. So it is also, of course, one of the reasons is to improve appearance and to enhance the appearance of the plants. Many of these plants, a more popular pruning is, of course, palms, queen palms, king palms, sago palms, pygmy palms. Those usually look very raggedy after some time, and having to remove any of those fronds, of course, will enhance the appearance. And although there are many techniques for pruning, depending on the plant, like I said, the one thing you always want to walk in with is a sanitized cutting tool that you will be using. Like I said, if you're going to be doing this, I am not talking about sanitizing every single cut. I am addressing how you go from one plant to the other. So for example, if I do prune my pygmy palms per se, and I will be pruning the entire plant before I go and clean it and go to the next one. So that is how you go about making sure that you do not transfer. It's not on every cut, it's on every plant that you do cut. And as you can see, many times you do need to make angle cuts. And this is one obvious illustration on the top corner of what a 45-degree angle cut looks like. And of course, how close to a bud it should be. Now, one of the things that I want you to understand when you're looking at a 45-degree angle is that when water were to fall on the cut, it would easily and quickly glide off. You don't want something very high pitched, as it is too angular on the picture next to it, or obviously too low or too high. And that's one of the reasons that we want to make sure we don't want to promote on the cut any potential diseases. Another thing with gardening tasks is, those of you that still have your lawns, bless you all, because there's plenty of work to that. Obviously, many of you. The one thing that you're going to do is manually turn on your irrigation. Many of you have your sprinklers set up at hours that you do not. And that is perfect, but you do have to occasionally do the maintenance of checking it visually, because of course it will expose a lot of problems. On picture number 1, on illustration number 1, you want to see if there's any puddling. There's going to be a lot of reasons why you may potentially have puddling in your soil. It could be a broken pipe underneath. It could be just the indention of the soil or the compaction of the soil in that particular area. So there are many reasons why you may have these situations arise from all of the illustrations that you can see on the screen. But for those of you that do have any of these issues in your landscape, be sure to go to page 100 or 200 of our Southern California Yard Transformation book. We'll be talking to you about that book because we'll make it available, and Haley will share exactly where we have it on our website. Now, let me go back to talking about the next thing that you need to take a look at besides the soil. It's going to actually physically look at every sprinkler head that is in your irrigation. And the reason being is, of course, you want to make sure that the head is spraying in the proper direction and that it's not broken like you see on the illustration. There's a crack and that needs to be replaced because obviously it cannot be repaired. On number 3, there's wear and tear on parts, and you can potentially lose the sprinkler head from the wear and tear of it and end up with a little geyser. Once that happens, of course, the other sprinklers that follow suit may have very low water pressure to none at all, and you want to definitely address that as soon as possible. Usually you can tell there's a visual because there's going to be water, a lot of saturated water in the area, or even soil erosion in that particular sprinkler area itself. Another thing that's very important, and one of the reasons that we sometimes see a crescent moon shaped dry area in your lawn is because it is leaning. Now, the reason that a sprinkler would lean would vary. A lot of times it could be just from mowing on a moist lawn, and those lawnmower wheels may potentially apply pressure, tilting it and causing it to lean. Other times it could just potentially be the plants that are nearby and they are uprooting or just the compaction of the roots nearby causing it to lean. Regardless of the reason, they do need to be straightened because that will definitely save you a situation of having a crescent moon dry spot on an area where that lean is oversaturating and then not wetting a particular spot. Number 5 is looking at how the mist is coming out. Obviously, mist should not come out in your sprinklers. Having mist in your sprinklers is definitely a sure guide to knowing that your pressure regulator has high pressure. And of course, on the troubleshooting chart of pages 100 to 200, it is also addressed and the resolve is on there as well. So for those of you that might see a fogging or a misting, be aware because that does mean that not only do you have a problem with your sprinklers, but you may potentially have a problem within your home as well. And it may cause other issues within your washing machine, dishwasher, and toilets. So be on the lookout for that and be sure to address it as properly as possible as it's indicated in the troubleshooting chart. Now, number 6, of course, is an obvious one. This is clogged, and it could be clogged for many reasons. Sediment does travel through the system and can potentially clog the filter itself that's underneath the actual head. And it could be as simple as tapping, unscrewing it and tapping away the sediment, or it could also be hard water deposit, which is also addressed in the troubleshooting chart on how to best address it. And number 7, obstructions. How many sprinklers are still buried that you can't even tell where they are? Well, that shouldn't be the case. And you should be able to visually see the heads of those sprinkler heads even in your lawn. And of course, once it's obstructed, it will impair the actual sprinkler itself from popping up properly and also from irrigating as it should. So you want to make sure that you can visually see the sprinkler heads and remove all obstructions. Number 8 is your controller. You want to make sure that you have a controller that has been properly set to the appropriate time. Many of them do have battery backups, and those batteries may need to be changed because, of course, you want to make sure that they do not leak as they expire, or obviously want to make sure that you do have the battery backup itself when power does go out. We're going to be talking a little more about that in regards to the irrigation scheduling tips. Now, you do not want to water the same all year long. I realize we live in Southern California and our seasons hardly ever change, but regardless, you do need to understand those occasions. Of course, usually winter and spring, you do need to ensure that the time is appropriate. Now, one way of ensuring that you're on top of your game with your irrigation scheduling is having a weather-based irrigation controller. And this will save you the trouble of having to do it as needed, because they actually do it based on the weather. Now, there are rebates available. Haley may address that later. And these rebates will actually help you obtain those weather-based irrigation controllers if you need an upgrade. But if you don't, be sure to schedule yourself to always change it as the season changes. And one thing that I do want you to do, regardless of whether you have a weather-based irrigation controller or a manual or any other type, I want you to make sure that you know the maximum runtime for each zone. What does that mean? It's a runoff test that identifies how many minutes it takes for the water to run out of the targeted area. Let me give you an example. Let's say your front lawn has a set sprinkler system just dedicated for the lawn, and what you're going to do is you're going to turn it on, look at a timer, and you'll probably observe that within the 3 to 4 minutes on a clay or compact, your water will start running out of your targeted area and probably go into your driveway, your walkways, or even your storm drain. And that's a fact. So for those of you that may have clay or compact soil and you run your time for longer than that, you're most likely wasting away all those extra minutes that you have your timer running for. Now, at 10 to 12 minutes, you'll see that in sandy soil, it will start running. And I'm going to explain to you later on what the difference is between clay and sandy. And of course, this indicates that clay compact soil runs off a lot faster than sandy soil. Now, what do you do if you do need to set your timer at 12 minutes? And of course, you seem to be at 4 minutes running out of your target area. Well, what you do is that you set your timer not at 4 minutes, but at 3. You take away 1 minute, and then you let your soil rest. You set the timer for another 3 minutes, and you do this 4 times because of the fact that you have clay or compact soil. Now, doing it 4 times will accumulate 12 minutes throughout the day. And that's exactly what you want. So every drop of water that is intended for your lawn stays in your lawn and is utilized exclusively by your lawn and not by your walkway, your driveway, your sidewalks, or your storm drain. And that's one way to resolve it. Of course, 10 to 12 minutes on sandy soil is how long it'll take. And usually that's relatively about the time that most lawns are watered for. But you do need to understand that because it goes in deeper, it also stays more moist than the clay or compact soil. We'll be touching bases on that in a little bit. Plant illnesses or death is a result of overwatering. That's right. So here we are thinking, oh, my plant looks droopy, it needs to get watered. No, you need to identify what's wrong. Many times it's as simple as, putting your finger on the soil and realizing that it's wet. So that can't be it. Maybe it's as simple as making an observation and noticing that it's got pest or disease, and it can be readily resolved. So here's my suggestion for you. There are more gardening tips on scheduling if you look at page 84 and 85 regarding irrigation scheduling. Now, I know many of you are going to be wondering, what do I need to do again about the runoff test? And because, of course, now you're realizing that that's probably why you have, your cement may have a lot of, uh, may obviously have a lot of sediment discoloration because you're constantly overwatering. And you take a look at page 84 and 85. When you get out there and take a look at your run time, you'll know exactly what to do. Okay, another garden task that you also need to address is drip irrigation for those of you that have it. Now, the first thing that I would suggest is, of course, opening your flush valve. Usually that's the end of your irrigation that has a cap, and you can unscrew, turn on your irrigation system, and let it run like a hose. The reason you want to do that is because, of course, sediment does get in it, and you want to make sure that it does not cause any obstructions. Now, for those of you that don't have a cap, you probably have a figure 8 that bends. You can also loosen it and, of course, let it flush. But I'm going to tell you something. Bending it back and putting that figure 8 to close it is not going to help, because you need to cut it right where the bend is and fold it again in that figure 8 in another part of the actual irrigation line. Unfortunately, unbending it takes it, the malleability, it's malleable, or it makes it loose and no longer holding that water in. So if you try it, you'll see that it'll eventually leak, and that's the reason why. You need to go back, cut it, put the figure 8 in it, give it that bend, and it on a unbended area, and of course that'll solve your problem. Number 2, we got to look out for those tears or breaks. Occasionally they're caused by people walking over them and piercing them with maybe the gravel, or for whatever reason you want to make sure you make an observation for it. Cut it and put a coupler on it, and that should take care of any patchwork that you need to do. Number 3, and I've done many visits with many homes of people complaining about drip irrigation. And of course, this is the number 1 complaint. The emitters completely pop off, and they start saying, well, it waters heavily in this area because the emitter came off, but now my plants down the road, down the line, of course, are not watering at all, and they're dying. So I take a look at it, and I make the observation, and I clearly know what the problem is. And if you want to know more troubleshooting in regards to drip irrigation, take a look at page 103 of the Southern Cal Transformation book. Of course, this situation means that you probably do not have a pressure regulator for drip irrigation. See, you install it because you have to reduce pressure going into the line. If you do not, of course, it may start off holding itself pretty well for a week or two, but because the plastics are very malleable, they will eventually loosen and cause the emitters to pop, just as you see in the illustrations. So be sure to add a pressure regulator for drip irrigation to ensure that you reduce the pressure going into these lines, and it will not be a problem. Now, number 4 and number 5, they are both pictures of filter. Have these. These are a lifesaver for the system, and you also need to check them because they will fill with sediments, and you want to make sure that you clean them. Now, one thing that I have seen is that they can easily tear, so you want to be able to tap off while they're underwater. So I would recommend pulling them out, carefully handling them, and running them under a bucket and just swishing around the sediments so that it'll loosen. Otherwise, because the filter itself is very delicate, you may potentially poke holes through it. But in the event that you do, a quick trip to your home box store, you'll be able to find them. So those are my things for the irrigation. Now here we're going to talk about hydrozoning. And hydrozoning is very important. It's an area of plants with the same or similar watering needs. Now what do I mean by that? For example, here is an illustration of a house that probably potentially may have had a lawn. You have a home, you have a driveway, and a side that when the builder probably built out the house, probably just installed a lawn. You see, that is hydrozoning. If you only put lawn in one area, you're hydrozoning that area. The reason you're doing it is because it's the same plant with the same watering needs. It's only one, it's one lawn, but obviously many to cover the entire area. Now, when you hydrozone and you do change out your lawn, of course, the best plant use is low water use. And what do we compare plant water use to? We're actually comparing it to the highest water use, which is going to be your lawn. So when you're comparing low water use plants, you're comparing it to a lawn. And what you want to make sure you do when you're changing and changing out your lawn or areas of your garden, what you want to do is the same thing. Put the same plant materials in one particular area. It makes it more efficient for watering, of course, and it will obviously prevent a lot of health issues with your plants. And I'm going to explain to you why. You see, on your right-hand side of the illustration, there is low water use plants, which is pink, and low water use plants, which is yellow. Now, if you were to have a high water use plant in the middle and low water use on each side, you would have a problem with either of those two plants because more than likely it's one watering system and there is no way of separating the water that is being sent to it at all. So watering, you kind of have to decide whether you're going to go with high or low water use. Very low water use can acclimate itself very well, but from high to very low is a very drastic change, and either you're going to drown it or starve it from its moisture needs. This illustration is perfect as to what is most ideal. You see in front of the home, you have low water use plants. That is perfect because if you want to irrigate, you make sure that the irrigation needs are met and they're not going to have a problem either drowning in water or potentially drying out for lack of it. And the same on the side, you have very low water use and low water use plants that are not going to have a problem acclimating with each other. So hydrozoning is very important. It's part of ensuring that your garden thrives. Putting, for example, a cactus on a high water use plant such as, tropicals is not ideal. Obviously, you're either going to dry out your tropicals or you're going to drown your cactus. They don't play very well. They may look attractive at the point that you're installing it and putting it in your landscape, but they cannot be in the same area because they do not have similar water needs. So be sure to address those hydrozoning issues in your household to ensure that your plants thrive. I want to talk to you about soil preparation. And one of the things a pie chart on your left-hand side, and it's very interesting in the picture of what a healthy soil composition should be. 25% needs to be oxygen. It's necessary to prevent an unhealthy anaerobic condition. And then you have another 25% of water, which all life needs an adequate amount of. So now you understand that in order to have healthy soil, you need a quarter of that to be water and a quarter of it to be air. Now, what does the other half need to be? 45% is going to be your native soil, which is going to be loam, sandy, silt, or clay. Then you need 5% of life organic material, which is going to be natural breakdown of decaying plants, material, waste products, obviously manures, bacteria, and living microorganisms. So understand that in order to have healthy soil, these components have to be there. 45% the mineral, which you already have. Obviously, a quarter of it has to be water and air, and then the 5% needs to be organic material. Now that we know that, we need to understand what kind of soil do we have? What kind of soil do you have? And I'm going to show you how you can do this. Also, all you need is a clear glass jar or a mason jar of some sort. You know, you can use your preservative jar that you can save. But what you do need to do is fill it halfway with your native soil. And obviously the other half with tap water. And you leave about an inch of air. You attach a lid to it and you shake it vigorously until you have broken up any clots of soil. You don't want clumps in there. So I would suggest definitely making sure that all the clumps that you can feel or see as you're putting it in there are broken up. And then you obviously put it in there. You can see this test 29 of your Southern Cal Transfer. And you can also see on that page that there's some more testing on. You want to really get a laboratory tested kit. Okay, once you understand what kind of soil you have, because this is what's going to happen. You put the water, you put the soil, you're going to shake it up, and the next day it'll be all settled. And what you will have is a visual of what you really have the most of. And sand is heavy, so it'll settle on the bottom. And that's where you'll know how much sand you have. What percentage of it is it? And of course, clay is going to rise to the top. And you'll know that as well. And silt, of course, is in the middle. Seeing the percentages will give you a very good perspective of what kind of soil you do have. And it really doesn't need to be that much more technical, because of course there's preparation for it as you work your landscape along. But remember, this is only 45% of that perfect pie that I just talked to you about in soil. So there's no need to panic and to be upset that you don't have the perfect silt or loamy soil that we all thrive to have. But of course, knowing with what you're working is part of that preparation. The number one question people ask me all the time, of course, is what kind of soil do I use and how do I prepare it? Of course, if you are putting it in a potting container, that's a plantern, of course, or a pot, you are going to need potting mix. Now, when you go to the box store, you're going to find potting mix and potting soil. More than likely, potting soil will be a little more affordable, and you'll think that's the perfect one. It's not. Potting mix is a little bit different. It does drain well, and that is very important in a container. And of course, components of the mix itself have been properly balanced to ensure that any plants growing in it thrive well. So when you contain something, of course, you are preventing any other elements from being a part of that soil. So for a potting container. Now, for those of you that are going to do boxes, bottom, in ground, or even just do a ground area, no planter whatsoever, and you want to probably grow edibles, well, the one thing that you're going to need is organic compost, because edibles are going to require quite a bit of it. And of course, amended soil. Amended soil does have some organic compost in it, but the soil itself is really more rich and ideal. And of course, you do blend that into your native soil itself. And that will definitely put your edibles in a benefit of obtaining the minerals that it properly needs for it to grow adequately and to grow those flowers and fruit or vegetables that you're looking to grow. Bulk material. Now that's one way of obtaining your material at a more affordable rate. But of course, there's some contingencies. When you do purchase bulk material, you are committed to buying by the yard. And if you're going to purchase it and do not have a means of having it uh, taken to your home, such as having a truck or a trailer, an open trailer for it, then more than likely you may have to also incur the surcharges of having it delivered. Now, I can tell you from experience, as I've with landscaping, that usually the minimum cost, the minimum is going to be 5 cubic yards for delivery. Anything less is not beneficial to the companies that are going to do the service for you. So keep that in mind. But the other thing I want you to keep in mind is that when you obtain 5 cubic yards after it settles, because it's going to be nice, airy, and fluffy, after it settles and it's tampered down, you will, over time, after you wet it, you'll end up with about half of what you purchased. And that would be normal even with a bag that you may purchase at a box store. So consider what you're purchasing in a box store. If you go for a bag, rest assured that after it's watered and tampered, you'll end up with about half of the material. And that's the normal practice. So there's 10 cubic yards to your right-hand side and 5. And over time, after you wet it, it's tampered, it settles, having half of what you see in the 10 cubic yards as if it was on your left-hand side. And of course, knowing what materials you're looking for, you can obtain the potting mix also through any yard that sells bulk material this way. And of course, there's also vegetable mixes, which include all the mentioned material that I had before, such as the organic compost and the amended soil. But I want to tell you something about that. When you do go purchase it, you may feel it and it may feel warm. If it is, be sure to let it rest for a minimum of 3 to 4 days. Now, why do I say that? The reason being is that if you're very tenacious and you really want to get your gardening done over the weekend or in the couple of days that you set yourself to do it, and you put that moist, warm in there and you immediately start putting your plants, you will burn them. The heat is a part of the compost. You have to let it rest with such fine roots, and of course you don't want to ever introduce a young plant to heat, especially coming from composted material. So it'll take about I would say anywhere between 3 to 4 days before you get all that heat out of it from being spread and mixed into your native soil, and then you can go ahead and plant your material. And that's just experience. I've seen people do it, and of course they're busy trying to overwater it and not realizing that they're drowning their plant material. Now, the question that others always ask as well is, do I need to mulch? If you're going to be doing organic edibles, you're going to be using. Remember we said that when you apply in ground, you're going to need to add manures and and that's what exactly we are going to talk about. Organic mulches break down, and obviously that's something that we want with mulches. You have natural material that will break down over time, like green bark and leaves and bills, and it's something that we're already applying to the soil itself if you're doing. Now, if you are just sprucing up your landscape and really it's a landscape of ornamentals, just color, no edibles, things like that, then of course it's not necessary it's not necessary to do it to the organics or the edibles that you want to grow. But if you're doing the landscape of just greenery and shrubs and things like that, then of course go ahead and apply it and put that material on there. Now, the reason we want to do that, of course, is because it reduces evaporation and therefore we're saving water. And it also feeds the soil biology as it decomposes to make healthy soil. And of course, even ornamental plants do need it to thrive, and we want that. So how much do you apply? The recommended inch of layer is 3 inches. Remember I said that when you bring in the material, it's kind of fluffed. Well, after it settles and it becomes more dense, it'll be half of it. So you don't want to pile it also near the plant stem or the trunks, because doing so may obviously cause other issues with your plant itself, such as retaining too much moisture, and it can rot it, or even bring any disease to it from pests on it as well. But the best time to is spring and early fall. So anytime you apply it, you can do 3 inches. Just make sure you don't let it touch the plant stem or trunk. And spring, you can apply it from spring through early fall. And another thing we want to talk about is inorganic mulch. It is rock, lava, gravel, pebble. Those are inorganic mulches, and you can use them in an environment that is comparable to what it does, which is over the summer during hot weather. Those inorganic mulches are going to generate heat. And if you have plant material that is very sensitive to it, of course, we do not recommend that you consider it. One of the reasons people do consider those inorganic mulches is because of the weight. Now, we do in an area that, of course, is we have crazy high winds at times. And if you were to put a natural material in, for example, my home, I have a corner lot. I live in the first edge of the corner lot, and I just happen to get the winds like my house is a Y. It goes left and right to me. And of course, if I were to apply any mulch that is very light, it would fly away, end up losing all my material. So what I ended up doing is that I ended up landscaping with plants that, of course, are drought tolerant, such as succulents. And I added maybe 1 or 2 cacti that I kind of like. And I knew that having installed them, I would end up with plants that once they were require much, it wouldn't feed off of the soil biology. It didn't require me to put that into consideration, of course, like adding the organic mulches on it, because these plants really do thrive in very poor soil. And of course, didn't have to worry about that mulch flying away, because the rock would just stay in its place. And when the summer came and those triple-digit weather days were on us, I didn't have a concern about it once they were established, because of the fact that they thrive in such weather as well. So those are really situations that are unique and that I personally had to assess and figure out best for me. And some, of course, you can do as decorative, of course, but you have to stay on top of things that within your control. Haley, do we have any questions?
We do, yes. So we actually got a question from Suzanne, and she just wanted to know, it's not a crazy question, Suzanne, but is our spring isn't until March, mid-March, but she wants to know, is spring really now? You know, with our
Well,
SoCal weather, we're getting 70, 80-degree weather, so.
actually, absolutely. And here's something that I want you to do. This is a great class and the timing is perfect for it. And I love that you asked that question because many of you are getting all this information and figuring out, wait a minute, do I really need to get started now? Yes, because there's a lot of prep. Remember, we talked about, making sure that your tools were in great shape and everything. But while you are waiting for that real spring weather to come in, you can start, if you're going to do any edibles, you can start them as early as now because, of course, some seeds require anywhere between 14 to 21 days. And that's always a benefit for those that have those kind of seed needs, because as soon as that comes in, you'll be in mid-March and perfect for you to be able to plant them out in your garden. Does anybody have, there was another
We did have a question earlier on. I want to make sure we
question. Okay,
definitely got to that, and that was in regards to the linseed oil and
okay.
whether that they would use that for metal or wood or both.
Absolutely, for both. See, the linseed oil will absorb into the wood and it will prevent it from cracking. And of course, you can also use it in the metals of your gardening cutting tools and your metal gardening tools as well. It is a protective barrier that will not hinder you to then introduce it into the soil. So it's not going to leave any residual that may be harmful to the soil later on. And that's one of the reasons we really like using that. Okay, we're going to go ahead and get back to some of the bewares of sales and freebies. You're going to be seeing sales coming up within the next 2 to 3 weeks because March is around the corner. And of course, I have these as you can see on your left-hand side. Now, I want to explain to you what these are. Called, but they're not. And we know what mulch material is. We just shared that it was organic material that is going to decompose and obviously benefit our soil biology. That isn't going to happen with this material at all. The rubber mulch is just rubber from what I understand, tire material. And I've smelled it after it had been installed for over 1 year. And if you wet it on a hot day, you can smell the rubber as fresh as if somebody just burned rubber down the street. Doesn't seem healthy to me. And of course, one of the things that it does do is that it cooks, just like I mentioned with some of the rock, but this one really does take it a notch above that. It really cooks the soil underneath, and the plant material does stress and suffer during those triple-digit weathers. Now, the natural scape we mentioned many times is called a mulch, but it's not. Now, it does prevent weeds because it's a barrier, but it does not provide any moisture at all whatsoever, because really what it is, it's wood shavings. And that's all you're applying to your landscape. Now, given the choice and understanding what healthy soil composition is, this is just material that is not going to at all benefit your soil. And yes, it's going to be replaced because it does end up it does, like the mulch material, it does go from looking beautiful and fluffed up to obviously settled, tempered. It loses colors. They even sell now liquid to into it, but I would definitely recommend not use material. Now, in regards to those freebies that you guys find, there are several companies out there nowadays that can promise you mulch material for free. And I had to jump in on that, of course, and look into it. And what I found out is that really this is just this is just waste material that was from companies that have shredders. So for example, if somebody locally just needs their land, there's trees that are overgrown or shrubs that need to get pulled away. Anything that can go into a shredder will end up in that collection, and then they want to discard it, because if they don't, they'll pay for it at the dump yard. But if they can get an address, of course, this will be something that you'll end up in your backyard. The unfortunate part is that when you do end up with this material, be aware that the material most likely comes from diseased trees, diseased or dead shrubs. And if you don't know what caused it, you may just be introducing it to your own landscape. Another thing, of course, is a concern that a lot of people have already complained about, is that it's not weed free. Who needs more work? Not me. Of course, when you purchase it, you are guaranteed to not have weeds come through. And of course, the same with manure. There are many places in the Inland Empire that have agriculture and they're willing to give it away, of course. But if it's not been solarized, then you're going to end up bringing in all the seeds that the manure obviously contained in it. And you don't really want that. And the fact that it hasn't been solarized, remember, I mentioned if it's warm or hot, it's going to burn your plants. And this is definitely one of those situations where it needs to be solarized. And then, of course, be able to use, so don't go with these alternatives. Okay, now we need to do a little bit talking about seed starting for those water-wise edible plants. And I have 9 tips to get this going. First of all, I recommend that you use viable quality seeds. And of course, for those of you that may have seeds from maybe a year before or a season before, and you're wondering, can I still use it? The expiration was only like early last year, but I have so many of them. One way of testing it is by putting the seeds in water. If they float, they are not viable. If they sink to the bottom, you'll be fine. Now use seeds starting soil mix. What am I saying? I am saying that there is actually a soil that you can find that is just for starting your seeds. And the reason this is a good thing to use is because, see, this has been perfectly formulated to start your seeds. It's not going to have any weeds in it. It is going to be sterilized, which means it doesn't have any fungus or any parasites in it, of course. So your seed will have a very good chance of thriving and doing very well. And the same thing with the containers that you use to start your seeds in. You either use new ones or you sterilize old ones. Now, many times I personally like to use used ones. And how do you sterilize them? One thing that I have used is bleach. I put it in a container such as one of those storage bins, and I've done the ratio of bleach of 1 to 9. You pour 1 cup of bleach and 10 cups of water. Now, there was a time that I think I actually diluted it a little longer, but I left the material a lot longer as well. So rather than just letting it sit for 30 minutes, I just couldn't handle the really strong bleach smell. So what I did is that I diluted it a little longer and left it for about an hour or so, and it did the job just as well. I used hand washing rubber gloves and a brush, like to wash dishes, and I definitely cleaned out those containers. I let them air dry and they were perfectly well to use. Another thing that you can use are the chopsticks or a pencil. Let me just show you. Here's an example. I'm looking at a ruler here. See that ruler? Unfortunately, it's clear, but here's a ruler, and I used a chopstick so that I could mark on that chopstick a little tick mark, so that when I am putting in a seed, I know exactly how far down to push it. Just right below that line. As soon as I don't see any more of that color, I know I've gone far enough, and it's the proper depth and most ideal for that seed to germinate. And always remember to label your seeds and use waterproof ink material. See, one of the things that does happen is that if you go and decide you're going to save all this money by growing it yourself from seeds, you start watering, you realize that it just bleached off. And you're really going to have to wait until you know what the material was, because sometimes they all look alike, especially when they start out. So that's just one of those little tips and tricks that you might want to consider to avoid any mistakes. Now, you always want to sow more seeds than you need. It's easier to thin out than to assume that they're all going to be viable and they're all going to thrive. So it's easier to, like I said, to thin and just to keep the healthier ones. You always want to provide adequate lighting for your seeds. And of course, you want to keep the soil warm and moist, not wet, so that it'll germinate. And one of the ways people keep the soil moist without putting it out in the element, if it gets too cold at night or too windy or things like that, you want to be able to use a heating mat, an electric heating mat that is readily available online or at the garden stores. And that is one way of controlling it, to making sure that they germinate very well and you don't have random spots or areas in your trays that may not germinate. And of course, you do not want to overwater or underwater. And that's one of the reasons you want to have a controlled environment, to make sure that winds do not have a factor in drying it out, because the minute you dry it out, you are destined to potentially lose your viable seeds from germinating. Okay, now there's 5 questions I want you to walk away with knowing when you want to grow, have water-wise plant selections and placement. When you want to know about that, the first thing you do need to understand is your plant needs. So one of the things is, how much does the plant grow? Now I can go to the home store and get a 6-pack in a tiny container of a 2x2 square of tomatoes. I love beefcake tomatoes and I love to grow those. Now, for those of you that don't know, beefcake tomatoes grow very large, especially the plant. And they can grow as wide as 3 feet and as high as 3.5 feet, almost 4. And of course, that is going to require a large cage and a large area. But when you buy them at the store, you're really getting a 6-pack in a small little container, less than an egg crate. So keep that in mind. What you take home when you buy it at the store is not how it's going to end up once it's in ground. So be sure to make adequate space for it. Now, another thing I want you to know is, how much lighting does it need? See, when you're at home, you can assess what is the sunny side, what is the shade side, or what is partial. And once you understand what kind of lighting your backyard provides, then you'll realize that your options of plants are really based on what you to provide. If you can't provide the proper lighting, you might want to reconsider the plant choices that you make. And of course, what kind of soil does it thrive in? There are going to be plants that are going to require you to water, and others that are going to require that cycle your water properly. In other words, you need to water it well until it dries, then you water again, which means that it doesn't require a lot of moisture. And of course, there are some plants that do not like soggy roots, so you cannot overwater, and you have to make sure that your soil doesn't absorb too much, especially sandy areas. And there's a lot of spots in Elsinore that do have sandy areas. And of course, you want to know, how much water does it require? That's one of the reasons that we now know that there is a stacking of information that kind of helps one another. Knowing the kind of soil that you have will definitely tell you if your plant will thrive. The kind of soil that you have also will tell you how much it'll retain it or how quickly it'll dry. So you also need to understand all those things in order to have a good choice of plants. And the final thing, of course, is that once you realize you have the right spot for it, you can provide the right amount of lighting, you got the whole soil situation resolved, and you've nailed the water issue. The next thing you need to do is make sure that you also stay on top of any pest or disease that it could be susceptible to. just because we water it. But of course, we have situations that can hinder, especially if you have neighbors that might be negligent of their landscape, or winds that could bring situations like disease. Excuse me. Okay, so understanding that is very important. Here's a summary and a recap. Well, we've been going for a little bit. Do we have any questions?
Yes, I actually just got I have two questions. One might be a little bit more in depth, so I might need to follow up with her. But
Okay.
she just wanted to know in regards to some roses. She says that she's not sure she's planting them within like the right season. She just recently moved to Lake Elsinore, and so she sees rose bushes a lot, but hasn't had luck growing them before. Is there any recommendations for rose bushes?
Absolutely. Ice, let's see, what is it? Iceberg.
Ice rose?
Yes, those are drought tolerant. They are very prolific with flowers. They're mildly fragrantly scented, but they are showstoppers. Definitely for Elsinore area, of course. And we still are within the good reason of time to plant them even bare root. So if she can find them bare root at any of the local nurseries or even those box stores, I would grab onto them. Otherwise, she'll be paying a little extra, but it's still plenty of time during this climate to go ahead and install them. Any more
Thank you.
questions?
And yes, and then I had a question from Betty. This might actually transition to our next workshop, which for those of you who are still with us, we do have our next workshop on March 27th, which is specific for water-wise edibles, our fruits and vegetables. So we're going to dive a lot more deeper into that conversation on March 27th. So please sign up if you're interested. But we did have a question is, how do you prevent lettuce, basil, and cilantro from going to seed? Once that happens, it dies.
It does. And you can trim it. You can trim it. One of the things I do with my lettuce is that I let it, of course, I cut it without cutting the root, and then it will still provide lettuce after. So that's one means of ensuring that you can keep your lettuce rooted and continue to keep it without losing the plant itself to seed. So you can trim it. Cilantro, it only takes a season, but the good thing about it is that it perpetuates itself with seed. So normally that I like at least a little bit of it to go to seed so that it'll just perpetuate itself. But of course, cutting it can also help, because it also, when it goes into seed, the energy goes to the seed itself, and you start seeing the plant really dwindle and look very raggedy as well. So those are little tips. But what was the other plant that she mentioned? I don't remember.
It was lettuce, cilantro, and basil.
Basil. Yeah, basil you can trim and it'll be fine. Basil will, just make sure you trim it as soon as you see it flower, or before you do, as soon as you see the buds. You should be fine. Okay, now let's go back to preparing your landscape for spring. We talked about gardening tool maintenance, sanitizing your garden tools, planting your garden. You can do pictures, you can do a list, but be sure to do areas or zones, and then you can do your task list from there. I always recommend that because it's the best way to see progress instantly, at least over a weekend. The ones I suggest and recommend, and then obviously the obvious reasons why. We talked about weeds, especially those that are really, crazy little rascals and are hard to handle. Sometimes it's best to get the shovel and take it out with a little bit of that soil to ensure you got it and don't have to deal with it. Identify the 3Ds. And of course, with those 3Ds is the dead, the diseased, and the damaged. And we want to make sure those are out. We talked about the pruning basics and the reasons for it. We talked about irrigation tune-ups and scheduling tips, and we mentioned pages And obviously, hydrozoning is very important because I gave you the example of putting something such as, you know, tropical plants with a cactus. Just doesn't go. You can't. The water needs are completely different, and one or the other will not thrive. We talked about soil composition. Now you understand that a quarter of what is healthy in soil you can't even see, which is water or air. And of course, the decomposed material, 5% of it is always going to be an improvement to ensuring healthy soil. We talked about the soil types and how to identify your soil type in your home. We talked about soil for edibles because many of you will probably start out growing tomatoes or cucumbers or other vegetables, and that you end up with that. Here we go. Haley, I think I just lost the share. Are we still there?
Yes, we are. Your screen, your PowerPoint went down, so I just put it back up.
Okay, let's make sure we have that. Keynotes. Okay, one more. Now we're going to go and talk about, Haley just actually mentioned this. Let's see. Here we go. One more, back. Okay, here we go. And obviously we talked about the mulches and seeds starting and plant selection for placement. Obviously answering those questions will give you a very good idea of what your options are within your own home and your own microclimate. And the final one, of course, is being able to, okay, I'm really having a hard time here, Haley. I apologize. The last page.
No, it's okay. What slide are you looking for? I have control.
Okay, final slide. Next slide, please.
Okay. This one?
Yes.
Okay.
So you have many choices when it comes to edibles that are going to be drought tolerant. And of course, you can see that there's many plants that you can use, such as the pomegranates. You also have the, help me out here. I try to make my notes. Rosemary. It's a great bush. It's great for cooking. And many other choices. And we're going to be talking, just like Haley mentioned, about that. So that's coming up in our next one. And we certainly look forward to seeing you, so you can see that you can add color and you can add a thriving plant that is edible, multi-purpose in your landscape. Okay. And I believe that's it. Haley, can you change the slide so we can talk about where they can submit their questions?
Yep. Okay. Do you see it?
I sure do.
Okay.
Now, the information that I just shared with you, I can definitely, if we can keep questions on topic of this, I can definitely answer any questions that you have that pertain to this topic. And of course, just so that for those of you that may not at this moment have a question in mind, but when you get out there and you start plugging away at the work that you're doing, or figuring out what it is you need to do, if there's anything that you want to ask me, be sure to send it to info@iuwaterkeeper.org, and I'll be happy to answer that question for you. Make sure you put on the subject EVMWD Spring Workshop 2021, and I'll be sure to answer it. Okay, so let's get questions. Haley, I know you mentioned there was still a few. Is there anything else that you have for me?
Yes, thank you so much, Isabel. First off, thank you very much. I love having you. You're so knowledgeable about everything. So I really appreciate your time. I did get a couple of questions. One being, someone had a question regarding the edibles that were in this previous slide right here. Do you want to quickly, I'm not sure if you missed any, but they want to know if they missed any edibles on here.
Well, actually, every single plant on here is an edible, and I'm going to be covering a lot more information in regards to these edibles, but they're all drought tolerant edibles, which is very nice, so that you're not overwatering. There's no need to overwater these plants. The establishment is one thing, which is usually up to 18 months, but once you get past that, of course, that definitely establishes roots within your native soil, and it should be an easy transition to then a more drought tolerant irrigation system.
Okay. And she actually wanted to know, in regards to the plants, the one with the pink flower, and then the next to it looks like limes. If you could just clarify which edibles those are.
Yes, you know what? To be quite honest with you, I did not include my notes on them, and I don't want to give you I don't want to miss the name, but if you can have me send me an email, I'll be sure to give it to her because I know that I have many, but off the top of my head, I just couldn't remember.
Yes,
um,
and reminder for everyone, we
speaker
are
notes.
actually going to be diving deeper into water-wise edibles for our next workshop too. So
Yeah.
we'll have a lot more information for that class if you want to join again, March 27th.
Yeah, I know my speaker notes aren't showing, so I really don't want to misquote what the plant is. I know we have a few, so I apologize for not having that information readily, but I can definitely share it with you as soon as I can get your email and send that information to you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Okay. And then I have another one. So thank you everyone for sticking around. We will be sure to continue answering questions as long as you're around. We did get one in regards to drip irrigation. We didn't really talk much about that. We actually did have a drip irrigation class back in November, and that is made available on our website as well. So you can definitely tune into that presentation, and you'll get a lot more in-depth conversations. Drip irrigation alone can be an entire topic. So if you have a particular question, let us know, but we do have a presentation on that available on our website. Let's see here. And then I would like to know the name of the plants on the last slide also. So what we can do is, and to save some time, we'll be sure to send a follow-up email with some more information for everyone on the plants.
Absolutely. And I apologize. My speaker notes aren't showing, so I don't want to misquote. I know obviously, but the one on the top really does slip my mind. I apologize for that.
Unless anyone has any other questions, I'm not seeing any. But like Isabel said, if you have any additional questions, you have my email. You can also email Isabel for questions. We're always here to help you out. We do, and then I did send out the link for the book. So, but if you did not see it, please let us know and I can resend that out. It is a free downloadable book that you can get. And we do have free copies. Once our lobby right now, we actually unfortunately are closed for safety precautions. Once that opens up again, though, we can make those available for you to come pick up an in-person book. Again, to be determined when our office will be open, but once that happens, we can get you more tangible items as well. There are, like Isabel briefly mentioned before, there are rebates we have available. One is for drip irrigation, another is for taking out your grass and replacing it with a water-wise garden. So I definitely recommend taking advantage of those. We also have one for a smart controller. So there's different outdoor rebates we have available that can definitely help you if you're interested in converting over, whether it's your sprinkler system or your overall landscape. We will be sure to send out some information for that. And with my follow-up email, which will include the survey. And if you fill out that survey, you will be entered to win a raffle to win a gift card as well. But if other than that, I see a lot of people are tuning off, so I really appreciate everyone's time and participation. It means a lot that you take some time in your Saturday to join us, and we will be setting up a follow-up. And again, a lot that you guys attend virtually. Until we can meet again in person, we will continue to do these online platforms.